You should smile, Mother. My son, Thomas declared, his voice amplified by the microphone, as if to make sure every guest heard him. He held Julia's hand tightly, his eyes gleaming with triumph. Because this villa, your villa, is now ours. A wedding gift from you to us. Isn't that right? For a moment, the hall was silent, filled only with the rustle of silk dresses and the clink of champagne glasses pausing midair. My chest tightened, but my answer came without hesitation. A single word that echoed louder than the orchestra ever could. No. Gasps spread through the crowd. Julia's painted smile faltered, and Thomas's face twisted in disbelief. All around us, whispers rose like a storm. I could see neighbors craning their necks, eager to witness a mother disowning her son on the very night of his wedding. If you are listening to my story, subscribe and tell me where you are watching from. Because what you are about to hear is not just a wedding scandal. It is the story of how a mother's silence turned into a weapon sharper than any knife. My name is Irene Caldwell. I am 65 years old, a widow for almost 10 years, and the sole guardian of this villa worth $20 million. To others, it is just a mansion on the hill. To me, it is memory made solid. The bricks, laid by my husband's ambition, the marble floors polished by decades of sacrifice, the garden where my son once played hide and seek before ambition hardened his heart. I remember mornings when Marvin, my late husband, would leave his porcelain coffee cup on the counter, still warm, as he hurried to work. That cup remains untouched on the shelf, a relic of routine and devotion. On the mantel above the fireplace hangs a framed photograph from our silver anniversary. Thomas was just a teenager then, his arm linked with his father's, his smile unclouded by greed. I once believed that photo was proof of an unbreakable bond. Tonight, it mocked me. The cracks had started long before this wedding. Julia would comment sweetly but sharply, suggesting I was too old to manage such a large house. Her mother, Helen, whispered about how estates should serve the younger generation. Even Victor, Julia's father, boasted about future family assets at dinners where I was no longer welcome. My son absorbed every word, each suggestion feeding his hunger, until loyalty became a transaction. I stayed silent through it all. Marvin used to tell me, dignity speaks louder than anger. And for years, I held to that, believing patience would shield me. But as I stood in the grand hall we built together, listening to my son strip me of dignity with a public claim, I understood Marvin had been right about dignity, yet wrong about silence. The chandeliers glittered above us like cold stars, their light reflecting off Julia's diamond tiara. Guests shifted, some curious, others smug, waiting for me to crumble. But I did not bend. I looked at Thomas, my only child, and saw not a groom, but a man ready to bury his own mother for wealth. And in that moment, one truth crystallized. Tonight was not the beginning of his marriage. Tonight was the beginning of my war. The silence that followed my refusal did not last. Thomas's voice cut through it, sharper than broken glass. "Do you see?" he hissed, turning to the guests. She would rather hoard her wealth than bless her own son, my father's legacy, and she treats it as if it belongs to her alone. Julia pressed a lace handkerchief to her cheek, her eyes glistening with well-rehearsed tears. "We only wanted to build a family, Irene," she whispered loud enough for the crowd to hear. We thought tonight could be about unity, but perhaps we were wrong. The audience shifted, restless. A woman in emerald leaned toward her husband, muttering just loud enough to sting my ears. Ungrateful? Or simply bitter? Another guest smirked, as if my pain were part of the entertainment. I felt their judgment crawl over me like a swarm of ants. I wanted to scream that this house had been built on long nights and weary hands, that every stone was laid with sacrifice. But instead, I stood still, my back straight, my silence deliberate. Sometimes restraint is the only weapon left to a woman surrounded by wolves. Thomas slammed his champagne glass onto the table. If dignity is all you have left, Mother, then keep it. But don't expect me to honor a woman who cannot even honor her son. His words sliced through me, crueler than any stranger's gossip. Julia leaned into him, the perfect actress, her veil trembling as though with grief. Darling, let's not create a scene. She doesn't understand us. Her eyes, however, flashed with triumph, and I realized she was enjoying every second of this performance. The orchestra faltered, then resumed weakly, strings trembling under the weight of scandal. Waiters froze with trays in hand, caught between duty and spectacle. I became the villain of my son's wedding, cast out, without ever leaving the room. I placed my glass carefully on the nearest table, its echo ringing through the hush. The gesture was small, but final. Then, without a word, I turned and walked toward the doors. The marble beneath my heels felt colder than the grave, each step dragging whispers in my wake. Outside, the night air struck me, raw and honest. Behind me, laughter erupted, forced, brittle, meant to cover the fracture that could never be mended. My own son had offered me humiliation as his wedding toast, and the guests had swallowed it like wine. I stood beneath the stars, my hands trembling, not from weakness but from rage held tight. If they thought silence meant surrender, they would soon discover the cost of underestimating me. The villa felt different when I returned that night. Its marble floors echoed with absence, each room whispering Marvin's name, while reminding me that Thomas no longer belonged to me. The laughter and music from the wedding still clung to my dress like smoke I could not wash away. I climbed the staircase slowly, stopping in front of the framed photograph of our family. My fingers traced Marvin's smile, then Thomas's teenage face, full of promise. Now, the boy in that picture felt like a ghost I had once loved but could never recover. In the following days, whispers turned into open condemnation. Neighbors stopped by under the guise of concern, their voices coated with honey, yet sharpened with judgment. Irene, perhaps you should have handled it more gracefully, one woman suggested. After all, children only want what is best for the family. Another added, surely a mother of your age doesn't need such a large estate. Why hold on so tightly? I listened in silence, serving them tea in the very cups Marvin and I had collected from Paris. As they sipped, I thought how easily kindness curdled into cruelty when cloaked in polite words. They left satisfied, believing they had lectured an old woman into humility. Even in town, I was not spared. At the bakery, whispers trailed behind me. That's the mother who embarrassed her son on his wedding day. At the market, strangers stared as if I had committed a crime. Their eyes asked the same unspoken question. Why cling to dignity when you could surrender to comfort? Nights were worst. Alone in my bedroom, I would stare at Marvin's empty chair, still angled toward the window where he used to read. His absence weighed heavier than any insult. Yet, amidst the loneliness, anger simmered a quiet flame that refused to die. Thomas did not visit. Julia sent no word. But through the silence I felt their hunger circling, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I replayed Thomas's voice in my mind. My father's legacy. She treats it as if it belongs to her alone. He believed his inheritance, already in his hands, as though I had died before my time. One evening, as I walked through the garden, the air thick with the scent of roses, I realized something. The house, the wealth, the memories, none of it mattered if I let them crush my dignity. Marvin's voice echoed in my heart. His old warning, dignity is louder than anger. For the first time, I wondered if dignity could also become a weapon, and as the moon cast its cold light over the villa, I promised myself one thing. I would not be erased. It was a Thursday evening when I heard them. Julia's laughter drifted down the hallway, muffled at first, then sharpened as I drew closer to the study. I had not expected anyone to be inside. Thomas had told me he and his bride would spend the week in the city. Yet there they were, Julia, her mother Helen, and her father Victor, their voices weaving a web of arrogance and certainty. Once the papers are finalized, Helen whispered, this villa will belong to you. Irene is too old to fight, and Thomas is the rightful heir. No court will side with her. Julia sighed with feigned innocence. She still thinks it's hers, mother, but soon enough, she'll be nothing more than a guest, if we even allow her to stay. Their words sank into me like poison. I pressed myself against the wall, clutching the wooden banister for balance. So it was not just my son's ambition. It was an entire family circling, waiting to strip me bare. Victor's deep voice joined in. This house is worth 20 million. Think of the leverage, the business opportunities. Once it's in your name, Thomas, our network will expand tenfold. Your mother's grief has made her weak. She won't stand a chance. My breath caught. Weak. That was what they saw when they looked at me. An aging widow clinging to memories, too fragile to resist. They had mistaken my silence for surrender. I retreated quietly to my room, my heart pounding. In the drawer of Marvin's desk, wrapped in fading parchment, I found the letter he had written before he died. I had not opened it in years, fearing the ache of his absence. But tonight, I unfolded it with trembling hands. My dearest Irene, it began, if you are reading this, it means life has asked you to be stronger than ever before. Protect what we built, and when the day comes that they circle you like wolves, call Caldwell. He knows what must be done. Caldwell. The name stirred something sharp within me. Marvin's old friend, a lawyer with a reputation for loyalty and precision. I had not spoken to him since the funeral. Yet here was Marvin, reaching from the grave, reminding me that foresight was his final gift. I placed the letter back in its envelope, my decision firm. They thought they had cornered me. They believed the villa already theirs, but they had forgotten one truth. This house was not built on greed. It was built on resilience, on sacrifice, on love too fierce to be stolen. And with Caldwell's help, I would remind them of that. The next morning, the villa was cloaked in an uneasy quiet. Julia and her parents had already left, confident enough in their schemes to leave me wandering the halls like a ghost. But I was no ghost. I was flesh and blood, and I still had weapons left. I sat at Marvin's desk, the letter spread open beside me. My hand hovered over the phone, hesitating for just a moment before dialing the number that Marvin had scrawled at the bottom. Caldwell, a name wrapped in memory and trust. The line rang twice before a steady voice answered. "This is Caldwell." "Edward," I whispered, my throat tight. "It's Irene Caldwell." There was a pause, then warmth softened his tone. "Irene, it's been a long time." "Yes," I said, forcing strength into my words. "Too long, but I need your help. Marvin told me to call you if the wolves came." "I assume they have," he replied calmly. "Tell me everything." So I did. I spoke of the wedding, of Thomas's public betrayal, of Julia's crocodile tears, and her parents' whispered promises. I repeated their words as if they were carved into my bones. "This villa will belong to you." When I finished, silence stretched between us. Then Caldwell said, "Marvin was wiser than most. He anticipated this. The villa is not theirs to claim. Years ago, he placed it in a trust. You are the sole trustee, Irene. That means no signature, no declaration. No son's ambition can strip it from you." Relief and fury collided within me. They announced it before hundreds of people. They wanted to humiliate me. And they succeeded for now, Caldwell answered. But humiliation is fleeting. Ownership is not. If you wish, I can prepare documents that will expose them publicly. Their lies will collapse under the weight of truth. I felt my hands steady for the first time in weeks. "Do it. Whatever it takes. I want them to see that silence does not mean defeat." "Then I'll need your signal," he said. "When you're ready for the truth to surface." I thought of Marvin's words in the letter. "Call Caldwell. He knows what must be done." My husband had left me the blueprint for survival, but it was my choice to ignite it. "You'll have it soon," I told him. "Consider this: the green light." When I set the receiver down, a calmness spread through me. For the first time since Thomas's cruel declaration, I no longer felt cornered. I felt armed. The house that had been my prison was about to become my fortress. And when the wolves returned, they would find iron gates waiting. 2 weeks later, the villa opened its doors again, not for celebration, but for reckoning. Victor had arranged a dinner, boasting to his business associates that soon new opportunities would come once the property officially shifted into Thomas's hands. The arrogance sickened me, but I accepted the invitation. If the wolves demanded a stage, I would give them one only this time. I would not play the victim. I entered the hall dressed in black silk, Marvin's wedding band gleaming on my hand. Every eye turned toward me, some with pity, others with disdain. Julia whispered to her mother, her lips curling into a cruel smile. Thomas, flushed with wine, raised his glass as if I had come to surrender. "My mother joins us tonight," he announced, perhaps ready to admit that the future belongs to the young. Laughter followed, brittle and sharp. Before I could answer, the heavy doors swung open. Edward Caldwell strode in, briefcase in hand, his presence commanding silence. He greeted me with a nod before addressing the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, My name is Edward Caldwell. I was Marvin Caldwell's attorney for over 30 years. I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding this estate. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Thomas's smile faltered. Julia gripped his arm, whispering frantically. Victor leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Caldwell opened the briefcase and laid documents across the polished table. This villa is not an inheritance to be divided, nor a gift to be claimed. It is the property of the Caldwell Family Trust, established a decade ago. Irene Caldwell is its sole trustee, with full rights of ownership and control. No one, not even her son, can strip her of it. Gasps erupted, louder than the orchestra on Thomas's wedding day. The very guests who had whispered against me now stared at me with new calculation. Julia's face drained of color, her performance failing at last. "That's impossible," Thomas stammered. "I'm her only child. My father's legacy." "Your father," Caldwell interrupted coolly, "was deliberate. He foresaw greed and betrayal. He protected this house to ensure it could never be stolen under the guise of family love." The words struck like a hammer. Thomas sank back into his chair, his bravado collapsing. Julia's hands shook, her diamond ring catching the light like a broken shard. I remained silent, letting Caldwell's voice echo through the hall. For the first time, silence was not my shield but my sword. When the final page was signed and sealed, Caldwell closed his briefcase with a snap. "The matter is settled. The villa belongs to Irene Caldwell entirely and irrevocably." The room was frozen, and in that silence, I felt Marvin's presence beside me, steady and proud. The shock of Caldwell's revelation did not fade quickly. It spread through the room like fire through dry grass, igniting whispers, gasps, and thinly veiled judgment. For years, Victor had built his reputation on confidence and influence. Tonight, his face drained of color as the truth unraveled. "You said it was secure," one of his business partners hissed, pulling his arm away. "You promised us expansion, leverage. Now I see nothing but empty boasts." Within minutes, men who had toasted to his power were standing, excusing themselves, leaving their wine glasses half full. Victor reached for them, desperate, but his grasp closed on air. Julia sat rigid, her knuckles white as she clenched her napkin. The diamonds she had paraded only days before seemed to mock her, catching the candlelight like cruel reminders of a victory that had never been hers. "Mother," she whispered to Helen, "what do we do now?" Helen's reply was brittle. "You stay quiet." But her voice carried no conviction. She, too, had been stripped of the illusions she had wrapped around her daughter's marriage. Thomas stared at me across the table, his lips pressed thin, his pride bleeding out in front of strangers. I had seen that expression once before, when he was a boy who had lost a race and blamed everyone but himself. Back then, I comforted him. Tonight, I did not move. One by one, the guests departed, unwilling to remain part of a feast that had soured into humiliation. The once grand dining hall felt smaller with every empty chair. When the last outsider left, only the betrayers and I remained. "You ruined me," Thomas spat, his voice cracking under the weight of disgrace. "In front of everyone, you humiliated me. I met his eyes, calm and cold. No, Thomas. You did that yourself. I only refused to play along. Uh. Julia rose suddenly, tossing her napkin onto the table. This marriage was supposed to secure our future, she snapped. Without the villa, without the wealth, what are we left with? She did not wait for his answer. Her heels struck the marble like gunfire. As she stormed from the hall, her veil trailing behind her like torn wings. Victor followed quickly, muttering excuses no one believed. Helen lingered a moment longer, her gaze heavy with something between shame and fury. Then she too departed, leaving Thomas alone. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. My son sat slumped in his chair, abandoned not only by his wife, but by the very family who had promised him triumph. And I, standing in the center of the room, knew the war was not yet over, but the battlefield had shifted. The dining hall was empty now, stripped of laughter and pretense. Only the dying glow of candles remained, their wax dripping onto the tablecloth like slow, silent tears. Thomas sat hunched in his chair, staring at the documents Caldwell had left behind. The weight of them seemed to press down on his shoulders more heavily than any father's hand ever had. I did not speak at first. Silence has always been my sharpest blade. But when I stepped closer, the echo of my heels across the marble floor forced his head up. His eyes, red with anger and shame, met mine. You chose the house over me, he said bitterly. Your own son. I let the words settle, cold and heavy. No, Thomas. I chose dignity. Something you forgot the moment you stood at your wedding and tried to strip me of mine. His jaw clenched. He looked younger in that moment. Not the man in a tailored suit, but the boy who once scraped his knees running through the garden. I almost reached for him, but memory stopped me. That boy had long since vanished. You think Father would have approved of this? He demanded. I pulled a small velvet box from my pocket and set it before him. Inside lay Marvin's wedding band, simple and unyielding. Your father anticipated this day. He left safeguards because he knew what greed can do even to family. Thomas's breath caught. His gaze lingered on the ring, but he did not touch it. You don't understand, he muttered. They promised me everything. Julia, her parents, the connections. I thought if I gave them this house, they'd finally respect me. The confession hung in the air, raw and fragile. For a fleeting second, I saw not malice but desperation. My son had bartered his own mother for acceptance he would never truly receive. I placed a hand on the box, closing it softly. Respect cannot be purchased, Thomas. And love cannot be demanded. You lost both the moment you treated me as an obstacle instead of a mother. His shoulders sagged, the fire in him flickering weakly, but pride still held his tongue from apology. Instead, he whispered, Then what am I to you now? I looked at him, my only child, and felt the fracture between us harden into permanence. A man who must live with the choices he made. I turned from him then, leaving him in the half-light of the dying candles. Behind me, I heard nothing. No plea, no call, no apology, only silence. The following morning, the villa felt strangely alive, as if its walls had been waiting for this moment. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, striking the marble floors where, hours earlier, my son had sat defeated. I moved from room to room with purpose, collecting keys, ledgers, and the documents Caldwell had left me. By the time the clock struck 10, my decision was complete. At the front entrance, the locksmith waited with his tools. His eyes flicked toward me, uncertain. "Are you sure, Mrs. Caldwell?" "To change every lock, yes," I said, my voice firm. "Every door, every gate. No one enters this house without my consent." He nodded and began his work. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed like a funeral march. Each turn of the wrench felt like a chapter closing. By afternoon, the house was mine again, not just in law, but in spirit. Thomas returned just as the final lock was secured. He approached the gate, disheveled, his suit wrinkled, his pride crumbling. "Mother!" he called, gripping the bars. "You can't do this. I'm your son." I stepped forward. The iron between us, a fitting symbol of the distance his betrayal had carved. "You are my son," I said evenly. "But you are not my heir. Not anymore." His eyes widened with panic. "Where am I supposed to go? Julia has left. Father-in-law cut me off. I have nothing." I felt the sting of pity, but only for a moment. "You chose nothing the night you chose them over me." He slammed a fist against the gate. "You'll regret this." I shook my head. "No, Thomas. The only regret here is yours. You traded dignity for ambition, and now you must live with the cost." The locksmith handed me the new master key. I turned it slowly in the gate, the click echoing like a verdict. Thomas's face pressed against the bars, desperate, but I did not flinch. I locked the gate, slipped the key into my pocket, and turned away. Behind me, his voice cracked into the night. "Mother, please!" But I kept walking, my footsteps steady, my resolve unshaken. For the first time since Marvin's death, I felt not abandoned, but defended by his foresight, by my silence, by my choice. The villa was quiet again when I entered. I stood in the hallway, gazing at Marvin's photograph, his eyes calm, his smile enduring. I whispered to the empty room, "It's safe now. Our home is safe." That night, the villa stood in silence, its walls heavy with history, yet unburdened by betrayal. I walked through each room slowly, touching the objects that had outlasted greed. The porcelain cup Marvin had favored, the photograph from our silver anniversary, the velvet box holding his wedding ring. Each item, once a symbol of loss, now became a reminder of endurance. I carried the ring out to the garden, where the moon cast a pale light across the roses Marvin had planted years ago. Holding it in my palm, I thought of Thomas, his desperate eyes at the gate, his voice cracking as he begged. For a moment, my heart ached with the familiar pull of motherhood. But then I remembered the venom in his words, the hunger in Julia's eyes, and the laughter of guests who had cheered my humiliation. I slid the ring back onto my finger. It fit as perfectly as the day Marvin had placed it there. "This is our legacy," I whispered into the night. "Not the house, not the wealth, dignity." And, from the gate, faint echoes of Thomas's anger still carried on the wind. I let them fade. Tomorrow, he would seek another place to stay, another life to build. Perhaps he would learn that love cannot be bought with betrayal, nor respect earned through deceit. That was no longer my burden to teach. Instead, I thought of the grandchildren I might never see, of the neighbors who whispered, of the friends who kept their distance. To them, I would not be remembered as a woman defeated by age or abandoned by her son. I would be remembered as a woman who drew a line, who refused to trade her dignity for comfort. I turned back to the villa, pausing at the great iron gate. The new lock gleamed under the moonlight, fresh and unyielding. I closed it with deliberate slowness, the metallic click resounding like the end of a chapter. The house was the same. The memories were the same. But I was not. For the first time, I felt stronger than the grief that had haunted me since Marvin's passing, stronger than the betrayal that had poisoned my son, strong enough to stand alone if that was what justice required. As I walked inside and shut the door behind me, I understood the lesson in all of it. Family is not defined by blood or inheritance, but by respect. When respect dies, only dignity remains. And sometimes, protecting dignity means closing the door even on the ones you once loved most.